seconds to continue his remarks when we go back to the debate on this topic. It is my duty to lay on the table, pursuant to subsection 7.5 of the Auditor General Act, the February 2021 reports of the Auditor General of Canada.
Order 1083G. This report is deemed to have been permanently referred to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the month of February, Canadians have been celebrating Black excellence and honoring the many contributions that Black Canadians have made in building this nation. It's so true. Black history is Canadian history, but it's the future of this country that we are focused on building, and a more resilient, fairer, and more just Canada is what the Black leaders and Black-led organizations that I've met with recently are asking for. I've met with the Foundation for Black Communities this week, an organization that exists to ensure that every Black person in Canada can thrive and that all Black communities have agency in defining their own future. And yesterday I joined a virtual visit at my local library in Milton with New York Times bestselling author Ijeoma Oluo discussing her book, So You Want to Talk About Race, on why anti-racism is essential to creating connected and empathetic communities. The event in Milton at the Public Library was part of the Canadian Caribbean Association's virtual Black History Month program entitled Our Legacy Guides Our Future. Once again, I want to thank these organizations for their tireless effort and advocacy and wish Black Canadians a happy, righteous, and constructive Black History Month.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government's response to COVID-19 has been and remains incoherent, constantly changing, and with no publicly shared plan. This failed response is because this government has chosen to ignore the basic principles of emergency management normally used during pandemics. Canada's emergency management experts, unexplainably muted during this pandemic, have clear pre-written response plans based on hard-learned lessons from previous pandemics. These plans would have allowed leaders to rapidly minimize the impact on our society, advise the public of the scope of the hazard, and publicly issue a complete written plan to address it. This failure to follow emergency management guidelines is resulting in massive collateral damage to our social fabrics, mental health, other health conditions, our children, our economy, and our civil liberties. Lockdowns and restrictions are short-term, not continuous solutions to buy governments time to get permanent solutions like vaccines and rapid testing in place. Canadians are demanding to see the Liberals' plan to end this perpetual pandemic.
L'honorable député d'Orléans.
The Honourable Member for Orleans.
We had the opportunity to virtually connect with the constituents of Orleans and a longtime leader of Ottawa's Polish community, Marek Kierna. Mr. Kierna had recently renewed in his role as the Regional Director for Eastern Canada in the Canadian Polish Congress, an organization that coordinates cultural events and community activities and promote international cooperation between Canada and Poland. I appreciated the chance to catch up on the going-ons in this vibrant community and hear how they have adjusted for the pandemic. Like so many of Canada's cultural organizations, they have had to make changes to many of their annual traditions and eagerly await the day that they can celebrate with each other once again. I want to thank Marek Kierna for his many years of leadership and volunteerism and congratulate him on his renewed role. And further, I want to say thank you to the Canadian Polish Congress for their dedicated work to raise awareness for Polish history and heritage in Canada. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to the memory of the Acadian activist Jackie Vautour, who passed away on February 7th at the age of 92. Jackie Vautour fought all of his life on behalf of the 228 families who were expropriated by Ottawa in 1969 in order to create Couchiboudjouac National Park. The actions of the federal government toward these Acadian families deserve at least an apology. It was inhumane to take away the fishing rights, land, and homes of poor fishermen and farmers. Pierre-Elliott Trudeau and his minister responsible for national parks, Jean Chrétien, drove thousands of people from their homes in the 1960s and 1970s. Fortunately, today, the federal government no longer has the right to expropriate families in order to create parks. This is thanks to people like Jackie Vautour, who stood up for their rights. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I'd like to offer my condolences to his loved ones, and especially his wife, Yvonne.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud and happy concerning the Official Languages Minority Communities Act and the update of the Official Languages Act. This is the first time since the 1980s that the federal government has devoted a clear vision for the legislative future of the languages in Canada. I am proud to be able to continue in advancing the vitality of these communities. I am sure that my father would also be proud.
Bien peuvent se voir refléter.
This plan will ensure the vitality of our institutions, as well as the promotion of Francophone immigration and French language across Canada. I'd like to thank our Minister, Minister Joly, and the Official Languages Committee, as well as all of the stakeholders who worked toward this end. Now, let's get to work in order to implement our vision.
For Regina Louvain. Okay, I'm just going to ask all members to please mute their microphones if they're not on. I'm not sure what it is today, but they just seem to be popping on their own. A point of order. Is there a technical?
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. It's technical. The last speaker, the French translation, or the French was overpowering the English, could not hear any of his speech in English at all.
Okay, very good. We'll have our technical people look into it. And okay, alors est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me clearly on the English channel?
No.
No? Has the problem been solved?
Okay, on va continuer.
We'll continue.
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a tough year for all Canadians, and for people in my riding, it's no different. Today, I want to recognize a few people and initiatives that are helping those in need. Hill Avenue Florists ran a program where they'd match flower purchases and donate them to long-term care facilities, brightening the day of seniors, citizens who have been suffering through social isolation. Regina Community Fridge organizers are now building their second location in the Cathedral neighborhood to provide fresh food donated to people in need. Another local business, Wheat Queens and Prairie Things, generously donated 75 gift baskets to senior citizens who were victims of a fraud scam over the Christmas holidays. I also want to highlight Sandeep and the volunteers of the Guru Nanak Free Kitchen, where members of the Sikh community in Regina have generously been donating food every week for 2 years to those in need. Whether they're donating their time or making financial contributions, the people of Regina continue to give back. Please join me in thanking the charities, businesses, and individuals that have done so much and will continue to help those in need.
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My riding of Etobicoke Centre is in Toronto. My family is not Francophone, but we're Francophiles. My parents were determined that I would learn French. They always taught me to appreciate both official languages as being part of who we are as a country. But French immersion is not offered, was not offered in our time in the public school. So I was sent to a private school where I received my education in French. For the Francophone community, it's clear that we need more than symbolic gestures in order to preserve French and to ensure bilingualism. In order to protect the French language and culture, we need to take action to have access to justice and services in both languages. The White Book presented by our minister does just that. Our government is taking clear action to support Francophone communities and to support who we are as Canadians today and in the future.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Toronto Centre lost a beloved member of the St. Jamestown community, Dr. Francisco Portugal. Dr. Portugal emigrated from Manila to Toronto in the 1970s, where he completed his medical studies and opened his own clinic. He was known for his infectious smile and his willingness to help, a willingness that went way beyond his profession. He was a community worker, an entrepreneur, and philanthropist. Among his many notable achievements, Dr. Portugal advocated for the Filipino caregivers in the 1980s. He was a former vice president of the Filipino Center Toronto and most recently founded CARP, which organizes medical professionals to bring health as well as dental care to those in need in the Philippines. Toronto Center, Mr. Speaker, has lost a legend who will be greatly missed by family, friends, patients, and staff, but his legacy lives on. Thank you for serving us so well, Dr. Portugal. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here is the COVID vaccine rollout summed up. Grand announcements, then failure, backroom deals with dictatorships, platitudes and promises with little substance, then constantly evolving deadlines. But Mr. Speaker, let me now explain what the Liberals are good at. They take failure and they masterfully spin it to proclaim victory. We will eventually get vaccines, but we won't forget the lives lost, hundreds of billions of dollars of lost economic productivity, and the months of uncertainty. The sad reality is that this trend reflects every Liberal promise. Announcements and taglines followed by incompetence and mismanagement. And then finally, they either condemn the promise to eternal bureaucratic misery or a result that is only a shadow of what the initial promise was. Canada deserves better, Canada deserves competence, and Conservatives are ready to form a government that will secure our future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to recognize R. Paul Dillon for being among BC's Entertainment Hall of Fame's latest inductees. As a South Asian award-winning screenwriter, producer, director, and journalist, R. Paul has made his community very proud. He's been able to shed light on the experience of BC's South Asian population, as well as highlight the significant contributions that Canada's South Asian population has made to the social, cultural, and economic fabric of our community and our nation. I would also like to congratulate Love Randhawa for recently being awarded the 2020 Best International Artist by UK Bhangra Awards and creating into the top 5 on iTunes, only hours after the release of his album Believe in Me. The album reached number 2 on the iTunes R&B charts in Canada, number 5 in the UK, and number 9 in the US. Congratulations to you both for your success in the arts.
The honourable member for Provencher.
Mr. Speaker, Manitobans, like all Canadians, are hurting as a result of COVID-19 and the restrictions imposed by governments in a response. Families have been forced to say goodbye to loved ones over video calls. Many have lost jobs or seen their hours reduced. Businesses have had to close their doors, some permanently. This is not the way things should be. COVID-19 has been with us for a year now, and yet the Liberal government's response has failed to mature with the passage of time. This endless cycle of restrictions, some imposed by provinces and others by the Liberal government, must end. Conservatives have asked the Liberals for a timeline to lift restrictions. We've asked for a plan on vaccine procurement, and we've asked for a plan to restore the economy. In every case, the Liberals refuse. It's time to stop the excuses and show some leadership. Protect the vulnerable, provide vaccines to those who want, and allow everyone else to resume their lives.
The honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Mr. Speaker, a government's #1 priority should always be to keep their citizens safe. This is why it's so confusing that the Liberals are attempting to de-immunize the law-abiding firearm owners in Bill C-21, while simultaneously introducing new measures that reduce sentences for criminals charged with illegal gun offenses. If they were focused on protecting Canadians, the Liberals wouldn't have voted against Bill C-238, which would have imposed tougher sentences for criminals found to have smuggled firearms or to be in possession of illegal firearms. It is abundantly clear to my colleagues and many of my constituents the Liberals are more focusing on furtherizing their own ideological agenda rather than protecting all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the midst of a global pandemic that has shone a bright light on the deplorable conditions in some of our for-profit long-term care homes in Canada and here in Hamilton. The site of the deadliest outbreak of COVID-19 in our city, Grace Villa Long-Term Care, exemplifies what is wrong with the for-profit model. 234 cases and 44 of the 156 residents, or 30%, have died due to the virus. We have heard stories of poor sanitation, lack of personal protective equipment, bad working conditions, and understaffing, resulting in woefully inadequate care. We recently learned that not one single long-term care home has had resident quality inspection by the Ontario Ministry of Health since 2018. It's time for the federal government to work with our provincial and territorial partners on long-term care. It's time to improve the working conditions to allow for better care. And it's time to develop national care standards and regulations in step with the Canada Health Act. It's time to take profit out of long-term care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. 2021 marks 100 years since the discovery of insulin. This was a major breakthrough for people with diabetes. But much remains to be done, Mr. Speaker. In 2018, young people came to the Hill to raise awareness about type 1 diabetes, which is still not well understood by the population. I met Juliette Benoit, an eloquent, concise, courageous woman who wants to advance research. She showed me the determination and discipline required to cope with the pressure that such a disease puts on people's lives. You need thousands of injections every year. Let's shine a spotlight on all types of diabetes, including the ones that affect thousands of people in Quebec. Research is essential if we are to improve the daily lives of people with diabetes, and we need to work together. Intelligence, knowledge, and funding must be brought together to move forward towards this goal. As an African proverb says, alone we go faster, but together we go further.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, in my riding, students are not able to find postgraduate jobs, people are struggling with mental health, civil liberties are being eroded, small businesses are going bankrupt, and families are not able to feed themselves, all because of the COVID pandemic and the Liberal government's botched response. I have heard from friends and family of people taking their own lives because of financial pain and isolation. It is very heartbreaking to hear. The reality is only about 4% of Canadians have received a single dose. While other countries are easing restrictions and opening up, our per capita vaccination rate is behind more than 40 countries. Mr. Speaker, we need to get the vaccine rollout right in order to secure jobs and secure our future. But this Liberal government is failing Canadians. While they negotiated with CanSino, a deal that eventually flopped, other countries secured deals with Pfizer and Moderna that put them near the front of the line. Canadians are paying dearly for this government's mistakes. This government needs to start doing their job so that Canadians can get back to doing theirs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hull Aylmer.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Aylmer has lost two great women already in 2021. A few weeks ago, I rose in the House to pay tribute to our former mayor, Constance Provost. Today, I would like to pay tribute to Charlotte Lécuyer, who represented Pontiac at the National Assembly from 2003 to 2014. She was very committed to her community and passionate about ensuring her fellow citizens' access to health care. Charlotte dedicated her career to improving health and social services for people in her riding. She remained a strong defender of these ideas even after she retired from politics. A woman of intelligence, strength, wisdom, and integrity. On behalf of my constituents, thank you, Charlotte. We will miss you.
Now, I believe the honourable member for Sackville Preston Chiswick Cook has his hand up on a point of order. I just want to double check.
Oui, Monsieur.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I believe there was a problem with the interpretation during the statement, so I'd like to have the opportunity to redo it, if everyone agrees.
Il y a eu des problèmes techniques.
I believe there was a technical problem, so yes. The Honourable Member for Sackville Preston Chiswick Cook. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to announce that the Official Languages Act is going to be modernized, as was announced on Friday. This is the first time since the 1980s that the federal government has devoted a clear vision concerning linguistic duality in Canada. As the only Liberal Acadian member from Nova Scotia, I'm proud to contribute to the advancement of these communities. I am also sure that my father would be proud to see this new vision of how all Canadians can see themselves reflected. This will improve the vitality of our communities, encourage Francophone immigration, the promotion of French all across Canada, and much more. I would like to thank Minister Joly, the members of the Official Languages Committee, members of the committee, and all stakeholders who contributed to this vision. Now let's get to work to implement our vision. Thank you.
Et avant de continuer, je veux...
Before continuing, I would like to remind members that when referring to another member in the House, we refer to them by their riding name or the position that they hold, and not by their personal name. Just a little reminder for everyone so that we can all keep that in mind for next time. And I also wanted to mention that before moving on to the next step, I'd like to remind members that members' statements should last 60 seconds. I know this is very important to members, and I don't want to have to cut them off, but sometimes I don't have the choice. Let's continue.
Oral questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it is deeply troubling that the Canadian Chief of Defence Staff has had to step down only a month after assuming command. This happened shortly after we learned that the Minister of National Defence sat on allegations with respect to the previous Chief of Defence Staff. So my question to the Minister of National Defence is simple. Is he aware of any other misconduct allegations against any other command officer in the Canadian Armed Forces?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government takes all allegations of misconduct very seriously and will always take strong action in response to any allegation of misconduct that is brought forward, no matter the rank, no matter the position. And let me just say, every woman in Canada should be able to do her job free of harassment. The Canadian Forces National Investigation Service has confirmed an investigation into Admiral MacDonald.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the government's quarantine program is in complete ruins. The hotline doesn't work. Travelers are ignoring the quarantine and waltzing right out of the airport, sometimes receiving fines, sometimes not. Most disturbing, there are reports of violence and people in quarantine hotels not being kept safe. If no part of this program is working, why has the government not suspended it?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has some of the strictest travel and border measures in the world, and that is absolutely as it should be. There are new variants of concern in the world, and our government will always do whatever it takes to protect Canadians. As a mother, as a woman, as a feminist, I am deeply concerned by the reports of violence and sexual assault. No one should ever have to fear for her safety.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I agree. But people are fearing for their safety. This government knows there are risks in the quarantine hotels they've set up. Health Committee documents show the government has been planning this series of quarantine hotels since June. But with more than 7 months of planning, they've still failed to keep Canadians safe. Australia and other countries had similar problems that this government could have learned from. So I'll ask the Deputy Prime Minister again, when she knows there are problems with safety for Canadians, why is this program still in operation?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this program is still in operation precisely because all Canadians are unsafe as long as the coronavirus is circulating in the world. And by introducing strict border measures, including obligatory quarantine, we are acting to protect Canadians, something we will always do. And let me remind everyone in this House and everyone listening that no one should be traveling outside the country for non-essential reasons right now.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, la quarantaine oblique.
Mr. Speaker, mandatory quarantines in hotels has been a source of worry and insecurity. Acts of violence and assault are unacceptable. This government needs to protect people quarantining. If this Prime Minister can't guarantee that Canadians will be safe, he should suspend the program. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if Conservatives don't want to protect Canadians from COVID-19, that is up to them. But here in the government, we will continue protecting Canadians with quarantine measures and with measures at the border. As a woman and as a mother, I am deeply concerned by these reports of violence and sexual assault. No one should have to fear for her safety. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the government had 8 months to plan the program. The hotline has been a failure. Canadians are not safe. Just like with rapid testing and vaccines, everything the Liberal government touches turns into a failure. When will this government fix the program? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canada has taken strict measures at the border and for travellers, some of the strictest in the world, and I'm very proud of this. This is essential protection for Canadians. Canadians who are sacrificing greatly in our fight against COVID-19. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have clearly indicated that no one should be traveling. And I will repeat, that can endanger you and your loved ones. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, this government is completely shirking its duties when it comes to hotel quarantines, but it's not that complicated. It just has to create a working hotline and make sure that when they get to the hotel, people are safely respecting health guidelines and don't get COVID. It had 2 months to prepare. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that Canada should be able to do this. And the solution isn't to cancel quarantines. It's simply to do what a G7 government should. For goodness sake, does this Prime Minister even care about governing anymore? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague from the Bloc Québécois. And I know that he agrees with our government in that we need to be taking very strict measures to protect Canadians. Fair and strict measures including border checks, including quarantines. And once again, I would like to state, for all Canadians, this is not the time to be undertaking unessential travel abroad. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Well, since I ended up asking the question to the Deputy Prime Minister, I should have perhaps asked her if she would like to replace the Prime Minister. But in any case, this government needs to do its job. We're in the middle of a pandemic. The government needs to do something. The government failed when it comes to rapid vaccine procurement. It failed on border management. It failed on hotel quarantines. I could continue all night It's a horror show, Mr. Speaker. People need a federal government that does its job. It's possible to work quickly and well. When will this government do its work? The Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, on quarantines, on truly strict and necessarily strict measures at the border, I would remind my honorable colleague that the provinces, including the province of Quebec, agree with us. They agree that we need firm, strict border measures to protect Canadians. That is something that our government will always do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many Canadians who can't buy the medication they need. Universal public pharmacare could have saved these people and given them access to the medications they need. But the Liberals voted against that. Why does this government always defend big pharma rather than helping the average Canadian? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, no one should have to choose between paying for medications and paying for food. We have already done more than any other government for a generation to lower drug prices. We will also continue to collaborate with the provinces, territories, and other stakeholders in order to establish the foundations of a national and universal pharmacare system.
For Burnaby South.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister made the same claim that the Liberal government has lowered the cost of medication, but that's not what I'm hearing. I got a note yesterday from Kathleen from Oakville, and she tells me her son filled out a prescription for his epilepsy medication, and the cost has doubled. He doesn't have coverage, and he lost his job because of COVID-19. So many Canadians cannot afford the medication they need during this pandemic, and this government has clearly shown they're more interested in protecting the interests of big pharma than people. Why is it this Prime Minister continues to choose big pharma over people like Kathleen's son?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no Canadian should have to choose between paying for medicine and paying for groceries. That's why our government continues to work hard in collaboration with the provinces, the territories, and other stakeholders to move forward in establishing the foundational elements of national universal pharmacare. That includes a new Canadian drug agency that would negotiate drug prices on behalf of all Canadians, thereby lowering prices. It includes a national formulary. It includes a national strategy for high-cost drugs for rare diseases, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. The Honourable Member, please go ahead. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the Prime Minister didn't seem all that concerned about the situation that he caused in quarantine hotels. People are spending hours on the phone, and hotel staff is overwhelmed. But now, in addition, there have been cases of assault. This is very serious and concerning. The government has once again improvised and brought forward a policy that it can't seem to apply properly. We are asking for the quarantines to be suspended until the situation can be quickly fixed. What is the Liberal government planning to do about this? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada? One moment, please. Canada has some of the most strict border and travel measures in the world. But with new variants of concern, we know that we will need to take more measures and protect Canadians from COVID-19. From the beginning of the pandemic, we have clearly stated that no one should be traveling, as that can endanger Canadians and their loved ones. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, it's not complicated. People's safety is in danger, and that's more important than anything else. Nothing seems to work in the Liberal plan. The government has failed at every level. I'm thinking about the women who have fallen victim to sexual assault, and I can't believe that this is being allowed to happen. Is the government waiting for more cases of assault before doing something? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, if my colleague doesn't want to help us, he should at least let us do our work. We have implemented some of the strictest measures in the world, not for fun, but because it's necessary. We are, of course, concerned by what happened at the hotel, Mr. Speaker. But is my colleague saying that we should shelve Canadians' health and safety and suspend the quarantines and simply let people enter the country at however they want? Is that really what he's saying?
Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' border and travel restrictions have been chaos from day one. Their rules have consequences for Canadians' lives. Shockingly, there was an alleged sexual assault on a vulnerable woman at a federally run quarantine hotel, and a federally contracted official is charged with harassment, extortion, and a sexual assault on a woman while enforcing federal rules. The public safety minister is directly responsible. Will the Liberals shut it down before one more Canadian is harmed?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, border measures are an important component of protecting Canadians from the virus, indeed from the variants of concern. And it now is an important time to remind all Canadians that travel is to be avoided. I will say these allegations are deeply concerning, and they are under investigation, Mr. Speaker. My officials are reviewing all the processes and protocols, including with service providers, to ensure the safety of all Canadians. But I will repeat, the border measures that we have in place are there to protect Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
I didn't ask about the charges or the investigations. I asked what the Liberals are going to do. And so-called concern and words are not enough. People are unsafe because this abuse happened in a federal facility run by the federal government with federal workers under federal rules. And what's galling is another woman complying with federal rules in the sanctity of her own home was extorted and assaulted by a screening officer sent by the federal government. So will the Liberals stop it right now?
Honourable Minister.
I'm deeply concerned to hear the member opposite suggest that we stop our border protection measures. In fact, they are some of the strictest in the world for good purpose, Mr. Speaker, to protect Canadians against the variants of concern, to protect Canadians against COVID-19 from entering our border, to protect families from travelers that have returned and inadvertently infected their loved ones. Mr. Speaker, these allegations are under investigation. We take them very seriously, but we will continue to apply appropriate measures at the border.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Upon entry into Canada, her passport was seized and she was forced into a taxi without knowing where she would be taken. She was forced into a federal-run facility under a federal duty of care by the Liberal government, and she was sexually assaulted. This is misogyny and a gross violation of her rights. The Deputy Prime Minister and the Health Minister have implied the victim shouldn't have traveled. Were they suggesting that she deserved what happened to her under their duty of care?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every woman deserves to live a life free of violence and a life of dignity. But I will repeat, these border measures are in place to protect Canadians, and they will remain in place until such time that science and evidence indicates that it is safe to release them. The member opposite knows that this matter is under investigation. We take all of these allegations very seriously.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
His attention was unwanted, but he still made his way into her room. He touches her. He took a condom out of his pocket and asked her to sleep with him. She said no. He insists. She was terrified, but no help came. He masturbated in front of her. If this is making those who are listening uncomfortable, good. Imagine how she felt. After she was told she could go to the hospital, but she would have to come back to her place of assault. They had removed the security locks from her door. Would the Minister of Health put herself in this situation? And if not, why is she subjecting others to it?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the assault of a woman is never okay. These are serious allegations and they are under investigation. Having said that, I will say that the border measures that we have in place are there to protect Canadians. We will continue to ensure that Canadians are protected, that they are safe, and we will refine processes with our service providers to ensure that happens.
L'honorable député de Beauport.
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. $51 billion, Mr. Speaker. That's what it has cost the federal government to exclude Quebec from shipbuilding contracts. The parliamentary budget officer has revealed that the cost of the contract for 15 warships granted to Irving instead of the Davie shipyard will go from $26 billion to $77 billion. $51 billion more. That's a huge amount, 37 times the value of the Montreal Canadiens. In fact, you could buy the entire NHL and even throw in the Nordique for $51 billion. When will this government give the Davie shipyard its fair share? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are, of course, committed to moving forward in the framework of our national shipbuilding strategy to ensure that our Navy and Coast Guard will have ships of the quality that they deserve. And we are involved in ongoing discussions to include the Davie shipyard in Quebec in order to complete the work that we need to provide proper ships for our Navy and Coast Guard. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. What's concerning, Mr. Speaker, is that in addition to these cost overruns, the Auditor General today has criticized major delays in shipbuilding. Irving will not deliver the warships before the 30s, and there are also delays at Seaspan. And these delays will get worse because there will be workforce shortages at both shipyards. So turning its back on Quebec, just as Pierre-Elliott Trudeau wanted, will cost the federal government tens of billions of dollars and take tens of years more than it should have. When will the government completely reorganize its shipbuilding strategy and include Davie? The Honourable Minister. The answer, Mr. Speaker, is that we didn't have to wait for the Bloc Québécois. We have already included the Davie shipyard without waiting for the Bloc. We are already including the Davie shipyard in the construction of warships, in constructing ferries and other major contracts. And we are in negotiations to include the Davie shipyard in other projects so that it is part of our national shipbuilding strategy. And all of that thanks to this government, not the Bloc Québécois. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would be ashamed of saying what the last Liberal member said about Davie. I would be even more ashamed given what this government has done regarding drinking water on reserve, because it promised to fix the problem by March 31st, 2021, and today the Auditor General confirmed that the government will fail. She said, Indigenous Services Canada did not provide the necessary support to guarantee that First Nation communities have continuous access to drinking water. Mr. Speaker, half of the remaining issues are more than 10 years old, and the government has the gall to blame the pandemic for its failure. When will this government shoulder its responsibility? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have received the AG's recommendations, and we share her commitment, and we will continue to work hard until all the boil water advisories are lifted. We have been working closely with First Nation communities since 2015 in order to alleviate the problems with drinking water. And despite the issues we've had in the last year with the pandemic, we believe we're on the right path and we will be able to end boil water advisories.
Abbotsford.
Well, this week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a plan to reopen the British economy. Last week, Chancellor Merkel did the same for Germany. Even many of the U.S. states are reopening as people get vaccinated. Yet here in Canada, different story. The National Post noted, when you spend more money than anyone else and end up experiencing death and economic collapse for 30 weeks longer than any other country, it's fair to call that a failure. Where's the Prime Minister's plan to reopen our economy?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Job one for all Canadians and all members of this House is to conquer COVID. And that does include, Mr. Speaker, in our government's view, strict border measures. And it does include, Mr. Speaker, vaccinating Canadians. And that's why I am so pleased that 643,000 doses of vaccines are arriving this week alone. Once that job is done, Mr. Speaker, I am confident that Canada will come roaring back, and we are hard at work with provinces, territories, municipalities, business, and labor to do just that.
Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, promises. It's been over 700 days since the Prime Minister last tabled a budget. The most important planning document for a federal government is a budget. Yet this government has spent hundreds of billions of dollars without a plan to reopen the economy. Millions of Canadians are falling through the cracks. Tourism, restaurant, energy, airline, healthcare workers are all being left behind by this Prime Minister. With Canadians struggling to survive, Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister finally table a plan to open up our economy?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is, in fact, our government's support which is helping Canadians, Canadian people, Canadian businesses do the right thing and get through COVID. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, Canadians would be suffering much more under conservative economic austerity. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the difficulties imposed by COVID, Canadians are working hard and finding ways to get the job done. In fact, in Q4 of last year, our GDP increased by 1.9%. That's an annualized rate of 7.8% and almost double the U.S. rate.
Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, Mr. Speaker, news reports say small businesses have taken on $135 billion in COVID debt, which puts 2.5 million jobs at risk. Many small businesses can't even access federal aid, but the ones that can will not be sustained on debt alone. They need a safe, open, and employment-based economy. Will the federal government acknowledge that its failures are prolonging Canada's lockdowns and table a plan to deal with them before we lose 2.5 million small business jobs?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to hear the Conservatives say they are concerned about small businesses. I sure am, and that's why I would like to urge the Conservatives to stop their delaying tactics and pass Bill C-14. And you don't need to believe me that this is essential for small businesses. Let me quote Dan Kelly. He says, Bill C-14 has some important measures for small businesses. The CFIB urges all parties to ensure this support is passed quickly. So, Mr. Speaker, let me echo that and urge Conservatives to pass these essential supports.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, hundreds of people have reached out to me over the past month and shared their struggles affording medication. People like Pam in Burns Lake, whose son's expensive medication won't be covered once he graduates, or Valerie, a senior in Terrace, who has to delay paying her basic bills in order to afford her diabetes drugs. We proposed a plan based on the government's own report, and they rejected it. When is this minister going to have a universal pharmacare program for Pam, Valerie, and the countless other Canadians who need it? When?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, we are following that same report, and we've been on a steady progress to implement national universal pharmacare. Instead of imposing a top-down approach on the provinces and territories, like the NDP have proposed, we're committing to work together to create a pharmacare system that works for all. And in the meantime, we've established a transition office. We've created a new Canada Drug Agency. We're working on a national formulary, and we're investing $1 billion over 2 years to help Canadians with rare disease get access to the medications they need. That's progress, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, they want to go back on their promises. Yesterday, by defeating our universal pharmacare bill, the Liberals showed us what's most important to them, big pharma and rich insurance companies. The Liberals have been dragging their heels for, 24 years? Yet there is a consensus in the province. The CNTU, the FDQ, the CSQ all favor the bill, just like the Quebec Union of Consumers. By rejecting our bill, All workers and low-income earners are being punished by the Liberals. Will the Prime Minister have the courage to look himself in the mirror after this stab in the back? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, surely the member opposite understands that it's better to work with provinces and territories than unilaterally impose programs on any province or territory, including Quebec. That's our approach, Mr. Speaker. It's an approach of collaboration. We are following the Hoskins report. We are moving forward on national universal pharmacare. We have taken a number of important steps. The government understands the hard work that's ahead of us in order to get this done. I think the NDP should understand the value of collaboration.
The Honourable Member for Surrey Newton.
Mr. Speaker, in order to target gun and gang violence, we need better data in order to trace firearms used in the commission of an offense. In 2014 and 15, the Harper Conservatives closed half of the RCMP laboratories that analyzed and traced these types of firearms. It is clear that we need to rebuild and further that capacity. Can the Minister please provide an update as to what our government is doing to help British Columbia enhance our data?
Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I want to thank the member from Surrey Newton for his excellent question and also for his tireless advocacy on behalf of the safety of the people of Surrey. Mr. Speaker, we're pleased to see that our federal funds are being used to open a new forensic firearms lab in British Columbia. This is essential to holding criminals accountable and to getting illegal guns off our streets. We're also renewing the Cross-Border Crime Forum with the United States and working on the creation of a new bilateral task force on gun smuggling and trafficking with our American allies. We'll strengthen gun control in this country, Mr. Speaker, at our border and in our communities.
Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, today additional explosive allegations of misconduct in the highest ranks of the military were uncovered. This time, the highest-ranking officer has stepped down for the duration of the investigation. All of this under the watchful eye of the Minister. Is the Minister of Defence aware of any other allegations of abuse of authority, sexual misconduct, or any other inappropriate behavior by senior officers? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, one thing I can assure the member is that we have absolutely no tolerance for any type of sexual misconduct. That regardless of the rank and regardless of the position, we will take actions. We want survivors to come forward, so that we want them to know that they will be heard, that things will be investigated. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have an absolute no tolerance policy, and we will take action. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, General MacDonald was the person in charge of eradicating the very behavior he is accused of. This leaves military members wondering if justice can actually be achieved. A safe and thorough independent investigation is critical, but senior officers who may themselves be complicit remain in key positions within the chain of command. How will the minister ensure that compromised senior officers are not interfering in these investigations to protect themselves?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member that every single investigation, every allegation will be investigated thoroughly, independent from the chain of command, and regardless of position and regardless of rank. We will take the appropriate actions because we owe it to our members. And I want to commend the survivors who are coming forward so that, and to let them know that they will be heard and that their allegations will be investigated. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, recently at our Agriculture Committee, a senior vice president representing Maple Leaf Food realized and revealed why a major processing plant was built in Indiana instead of here in Canada. And she states, the not so good with our regulatory system is that it stymies investment, it creates barriers to predictability, innovation, and cost efficiency that often time far outweigh and sometimes even stymie the health and environmental positives we are trying to gain. Mr. Speaker, this government is failing on job creation. When are they going to get to work and start creating paychecks instead of pink slips for Canadians?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government absolutely understands that the single most important thing for Canadians right now is to recover the jobs lost by COVID. That's why I am delighted to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that notwithstanding the extremely difficult circumstances today, Canada has already recovered 71% of the jobs lost in the wake of the pandemic, and that compares to just 56% of the jobs recovered in the United States. I'd like to thank all the hardworking Canadians and Canadian businesses who are behind that.
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians don't believe a word that comes out of that minister's mouth. There are 213,000 more unemployed Canadians. This government has the worst job creation record in the G7. Canadians are tired of empty platitudes and broken promises. It's time for the Liberal front benches to get to work so Canadians from coast to coast to coast can get back to earning paychecks. When will the Economic Development Minister and her cabinet colleagues bring forward a real plan to get our economy back on track and get Canadians back to work?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite doesn't want to believe my words, let me quote David Parkinson from the Globe and Mail. Here's what he has to say. For the economy as a whole, there are remarkably healthy signs. Unlike last spring's lockdowns, it appears we've learned how to keep the economy rolling. The underlying recovery remains largely intact. Thanks again to all the hardworking, innovative Canadian businesses who have made that possible.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, thousands of people are receiving their T4s and realizing that fraudsters applied for the CERB in their name. But the government hasn't responded. People spend hours on the phone without getting through. It's easier to get people's personal information to defraud them than it is to get through to the CRA. I'd point out that it's because of the lack of verification by the agency before sending the CERB checks out that this fraud was possible. What is the minister doing to correct the situation and to help the victims? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. We appreciate all the work of the people at the call centres who have done the work over the past year. There's been an 83% increase since 2020, and an external firm has been hired to deal with the increase in the number of calls during the tax season. It's a temporary measure that will guarantee that Canadians receive quality service. Between now and March, we will be hiring another 2,000 employees. We will increase the hours at the CRA. So we will continue to work hard to serve Canadians. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, the revenue agencies abandoning victims of CERB fraud. I've talked to parents whose 3 children have been defrauded. They spend hours on the phone, and then when they get through, they're told the agency can only deal with one file at a time. They have to call back for the other 2 children. Parents are forced to take time off to work because contacting the agency is a full-time job. Come on, are they using the same number as they're using for the hotel quarantines? The Honourable Minister. As I said, I want to thank employees in the call centres for their work. They've seen an increase of 83% in calls at the agency. And I want to reassure people who are victims of fraud that they will not have to reimburse the money to the Government of Canada. We will continue to work hard so that people have better service, Mr. Speaker.
For Saskatoon, Grasswood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Saskatchewan is home to nearly 1.2 million people. But unfortunately, only 43,000 have received at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. So that is less than 4%. Meanwhile, in the United States, there are around 12%, and we know in Israel, nearly 50%. Why is our government so far behind our allies in providing vaccines to those who want them?
Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we of course share the urgency of the honourable member in vaccinating the people of Saskatchewan and indeed every Canadian. And that is why we are very happy that we're able to fill our commitment to receive 6 million doses in the first quarter of this year, over 23 million doses in the second quarter, and more than enough of pre-approved vaccines to vaccinate every Canadian by the end of September. That, of course, includes every person in Saskatchewan who wishes to receive a dose, and we look forward to that day, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Les Belots-Binières. Mr. Speaker, the government mismanaged the arrival of vaccines, but on top of that, they don't even know how much that cost. There's a gap, $11 billion gap between the figures budgeted by the department and estimated costs. Mr. Speaker, what caused this gap that has led to this huge deficit? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we do every year account for all government expenditures in the public accounts of Canada. It will be transparent, as the member will be able to see. We were doing everything to protect Canadians when it comes to personal protective equipment and when it comes to vaccines. And we will have enough vaccines to vaccinate everyone by the end of September.
Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, this government tries to make Canadians believe that they are focused on helping them, but actions speak louder than words. This week, I received an email from a single pensioner in my riding who got an EI repayment demand for $130. Contrast that with the calls I'm getting from constituents asking when are their vaccines coming. They want to get back to work, off of EI, and return to a normal life. How is it that this government has the resources to go after paltry sums of money but can't get vaccines to these same Canadians?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm committed to working to ensure that every Canadian receives the benefits they're entitled to, including EI. We are not asking people to repay if they can't afford to. I'm happy to work with the member opposite to on that particular case. Of course, I will follow up with him directly after question period. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pickering-Uxbridge.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 is the most serious public health crisis Canada has ever faced. It has laid bare fundamental gaps in our society and disproportionately impacted those who are already marginalized, vulnerable, or struggling. Women have faced steep job losses, and many have bravely served on the front lines of this crisis in our communities and carried the burden of unpaid care work at home. With International Women's Day approaching on March 8th, can the Minister for Women, Gender and Equality update this House on the theme for this day and how we will be marking this occasion?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Pickering-Uxbridge for her strength and for her leadership. This International Women's Day, we salute the women on the front lines of the fight against COVID. We acknowledge all the ways that women, particularly racialized women, have been hardest hit by COVID. We invite applications to our $100 million Feminist Response and Recovery Fund, and we will convene a virtual 2-day summit focused on Canada's feminist response and recovery. Our government will continue to work with strong feminists to create 1 million jobs and to improve the health and safety outcomes for all women.
The Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Speaker, the GTA is home to thousands of airline sector employees. In fact, Barrie Innisfil is known as Terminal 4, and I can't begin to explain the level of frustration and anxiety and anger among pilots, flight attendants, service agents, employees and their families as they sit at home, their lives and livelihoods threatened because of incoherent policies and the resulting lack of sectoral support. For months now, as layoffs mount, routes are cut and planes parked, all these families have heard from these Liberals is that support is coming. On behalf of these anxious families, Mr. Speaker, I want to know when that support is going to be coming.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the question. As a Member of Parliament for Mississauga, where many employees of the aviation sector live and work, I am very much in touch with them and the anxiety that they're going through today due to the COVID pandemic. And I can assure my honourable colleague and all employees of the aviation sector that we are engaged with the airline sector with a sense of urgency on finalizing a support package because the aviation sector, Mr. Speaker, is important for Canada's economy and is important for Canada's security. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Barrie Springwater, Oro Medonte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I had the privilege of meeting with the Independent Travel Advisors Association of Canada. Many Canadians are suffering through this pandemic, but travel advisors are being decimated. These self-employed, hardworking individuals work on 100% commission. As we all know, the travel industry has been shut down for many months. Therefore, they have had no ability to make any revenue. Now they are concerned they may have to pay back past commissions. Will the Prime Minister listen to the concerns of these hardworking Canadians and ensure their livelihoods are protected in any rescue package provided to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, thank you for this question. And I want to assure my honourable colleague that we are listening. And as I said earlier, we are currently in discussions with the airline sector on providing a customized support given the conditions that they're going through right now. And I can assure my honourable colleague that refunds, that regional routes restoration, that commissions are part of the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian young people and their parents are growing increasingly concerned about the alarming decline of job opportunities as a result of this government's response to the pandemic. Experts are saying it will be a decade before opportunities for our young people return to pre-pandemic levels. We know that in December 2020, 250,000 young people were out of work compared to the year prior. This government has made hundreds of announcements and spent billions upon billions of dollars in the last year on pandemic emergency spending, and yet they have failed to provide Canadians a jobs recovery plan for our young people to secure their future. Where is it? Where is the plan?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will always work on behalf of young people in Canada. That's exactly why we have a full voice at the cabinet table. When it comes to not only employment opportunities, but creating opportunities that young people are involved, we will continue to do that. If you look at the strengthening of the youth employment skills strategy, our government has committed to do that. Canada Summer Jobs, we have doubled the number of Canada Summer Jobs, and young people can continue to apply. In response to COVID-19 pandemic, we made sure that youth were at the forefront of our response. We will continue working on behalf of young people. They are not only leaders of tomorrow, they are the leaders of today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Nickel Belt. Mr. Speaker, Canadian farmers work hard every day to produce high-quality products. In September 2019, in Verner, Ontario, the largest international ploughing contest and rural exhibition of all time was held. Thanks to thousands of community volunteers, the agriculture sector is working hard and facing challenges during the pandemic. Can the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food acknowledge the support our government has put in place to help the agri-food sector across Canada? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are very grateful to our producers who have risen to the challenge and continue to keep our stores full of products during the pandemic. It's been a record year for exports, and it's been over $70 million. Canada is here to help them make it through the pandemic with support to programs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Yesterday, the NDP put forward a life-saving pharmacare bill that would help thousands of Canadians who can't afford their medication. 88% of Canadians support a universal pharmacare program, yet of the 34 members of Parliament in Alberta, I was the only one who voted to support this bill. We need to ensure Alberta healthcare is strengthened at the federal level to prevent erosion at the provincial level. How can the Prime Minister justify voting against this bill, which would help Canadians pay for life-saving medication?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what the NDP and my honourable colleague, failed to recognize is that we must work with provinces and territories to ensure a pharmacare program that will work for everyone. That is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. We've done more than any government in a generation to lower drug prices. I am working with my colleagues on a national universal pharmacare plan. We've established a transition office to create a new Canada Drug Agency and a national formulary, and we're investing $1 billion, Mr. Speaker, over 2 years to help Canadians get access to the medications they need who live with rare disease. Mr. Speaker, that's real progress.
The honourable member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, some of my constituents were instructed by officials that in order to access CRB, they must first apply for EI. Despite not being qualified for EI, they complied and were denied. Then when they applied for the CRB, CRA disqualified them because the system shows them as having active EI applications. Can the government please explain what is being done to resolve the issues between these two departments?
The Honourable Minister.
I thank the member for his question, Mr. Speaker. We know that this continues to be a difficult time for many, which is why we transitioned to a simplified EI program and created 3 new recovery benefits to support Canadians. Service Canada and the CRA work closely together to share data on Canadians who apply for benefits to ensure that only one benefit is paid to someone applying at any given time. And in some instances, this can cause a delay. That said, we understand that any delay in receiving benefits can be really hard for people, and that's why Service Canada and the CRA are continuing to work closely together to reduce delays and ensure Canadians are paid the benefits they need in a timely manner. Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. C'est tout le temps que nous avons. I wish to inform the House that the Chair has received notice from the House leaders of all recognized parties stating that they are satisfied that the remote voting solution is ready to be used. En conséquence,
accordingly,
I'll take the applause. It's the only time I get much, but that's
accordingly, starting as of the next sitting, February 26, 2021, and until June 23, 2021, members voting remotely will use the new electronic voting system.
Information about this new system is available at Members on Source. Now we have the Thursday question, l'honorable député de Louis.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker,